that's something that sits out on compromised machines and collects credentials, whether it's key logged, whether it's scraping files, whether it's sitting inline. It's on these devices, and then it's feeding back to a central repository. All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Brad Bussie, Chief Information Security Officer here at E360. Thank you for joining me for the State of Enterprise IT Security Edition. This is the show that makes IT security approachable and actionable for technology leaders. I'm happy to bring you 3 different topics this week. The first one is OpenAI. They've introduced something new called Teams. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that and some of the privacy components. The second is the introduction of the ChatGPT store. What is it? And are there some potential problems for enterprises? And the third, have I been pwned? They added a statistically significant data set, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So with that, let's get started. So first and foremost, OpenAI has a new pricing model. So you can still get it for free, but you only have access to the ChatGPT 3 model. You can pay for an individual license, which gives you access to DAL and ChatGPT 4. And that's, I think, running probably when this was recorded, $20. Could be more when you listen to this. We'll see. But I think what's interesting is there's now a Teams option, and it's $25 a month. But what you get as part of that Teams is privacy. So anything that you do, ask, or put into the prompt will not be used to train the ChatGPT LLM. So that's something that some people know, but not everybody knows, is that when you type something into a lot of these publicly facing and available LLMs, whether it's Google Bard, whether it's Bing Chat, or whether it's ChatGPT, what you're typing in, it's going to go to train the model, which means if there's enough information in there, anyone with access can get that information back out of ChatGPT. And it's kind of funny, I've actually done this as an author. I was asking ChatGPT, do you know who the author Brad Bussie is? And when I first started this, it had no idea who I was, which was sad, but that's okay. So what I ended up doing is I started to feed it more information, like, hey, let me tell you who I am. Let me tell you about the books I've written. Let me give you some synopsis as well as descriptions, things like that. Next thing I know, now when I ask, do you know who the person is, me, it actually comes back with something. So that's a very finite kind of focused use case, but you can imagine if you start asking questions, maybe it's something medical related, maybe it's something just concerning overall about your privacy, you're really giving it away. So what I want you to think about is with the Teams option, you can do this, and then whatever you are prompting the LLM to bring back to you, it's private. It's just for you. So I think that's definitely interesting. You'll have access. So let's say you do the Teams option. You'll still have access to things like DAL 3. You'll get the GPT-4 with vision. You'll get the browsing, the advanced data analysis. I know what you're thinking. This is not a commercial for ChatGPT. I don't get paid for this endorsement. I'm just telling you a little bit about it. So this also is a secure workspace for your team. So when you go in and you sign up for this, you can add other people to the team, and then you can collaborate and do different things. I won't go too much into that. And I think it's interesting too, because I've heard people refer to doll, or DALLE3. They call it Dolly. So I think it just depends on how you say it. So if you're wondering what I'm talking about, that's what I'm talking about. And then I think the other thing that you should keep your eye on is there is an admin console for the workspace and team management. And then you do get early access to some of the new features and improvements. So it feels a lot like the enterprise option, but you don't have to get the big quote and spend a lot of time and or money. It's more accessible for everyone else. And I think this is definitely the most approachable way to get started with one of these large LLMs in a team setting without having to go full enterprise. So one thing that I would urge you to do is to take a look at the acceptable use policy. And there are some guidelines on how to use AI. And these are things that are constantly updated. So that's something for not just the machine learning / LLMs out there, but that's also for organizations. And we'll talk about that in some podcasts in the future, where we're going to really define the governance around the usage of these different platforms and what enterprises and organizations need to be thinking about when they allow their users to start leveraging this technology. So, second topic, the introduction of the ChatGPT store. And are there potential problems for enterprises? So, this was something that we talked about previously, but to bring you back up to speed, the ChatGPT store is just like any other app store. So you can go there and you can shop for GPTs that other people have made. And they create the GPTs leveraging an API that is given by OpenAI and ChatGPT overall. So what that does is it allows someone who has a developer background to go in and create their own GPT, their own large language model, but they're leveraging what OpenAI built. So you're probably asking yourself, well, what use does that have? I spent a lot of time looking at this app store, and there's absolutely just amazing things out there already. Like if you really like cars, if you really like, motorcycles, if you really like other things, there are GPTs now that are built that anything and everything you want to know about fixing a car or whatever, you're probably thinking, well, I can just get that information on Google. Well, this goes a step further because you're prompting just like you do in any other of these GPT examples. And next thing you know, it's like giving you step-by-step instructions on how to do something. And it's saying, oh, and by the way, other people have had a problem with, the distributor cap on whatever. And so it gives you an idea of like what you should be doing. So it's pretty cool. And you definitely get a lot of that predictive learning. So as people are using these GPTs from the store, they're just going to get better. And that brings the problem. If you're feeding these GPTs with information, you have to be aware they probably don't have the same privacy concerns as like the enterprise version or the Teams version does. Now, what I did is I actually went through and looked at some of the policies, and that includes privacy policies, acceptable use, and things that OpenAI is telling developers they can and can't do with the platform. It used to be a lot more restrictive, but now there are some things that you should think about. So first and foremost, they're in the business of maximizing innovation and creativity. So they want a thriving economy, very similarly to how Apple did this back in the day when they released their app store. And people were in the beginning like, well, what am I going to use an app for on my phone? Well, now we really can't survive without those apps on our phone. So it's just that forward thinking, what can you do with a GPT customized? And I would actually challenge you to say, what can't you do? It's pretty amazing. But there are some restrictions, such as, you still have to comply with laws. And one of the primary tenets is that you don't compromise the privacy of others. And you need to make sure that when these are designed, you're engaging in a regulated activity. So you heard me talk on a previous podcast about the GPTs that have been created for hackers. But what I don't think we'd spent enough time on is the fact that some of those LLMs have actually been stolen and copied, and they are not sanctioned by OpenAI or Google or anyone else. So they're using an LLM. It may look and feel very similar to what OpenAI has built, but it's definitely not sanctioned. It doesn't have the same privacy controls and concerns. But what OpenAI is saying is anything on their app store has to comply with some of these things. Like you can't use the service to harm yourself or others. So one use case was, you can't promote a service that's going to do self-harm, develop or use weapons. I mean, when I was growing up, everybody was trying to get their hands on something called the Anarchist Cookbook. We were just a bunch of teenagers, didn't truly understand what that was all about. But that book is pretty much what OpenAI is trying to prevent, which is, hey, how do you make a grenade? Or do you make dynamite? Or how do you do these things? Because, if you Google search that kind of stuff, fairly quickly someone will be showing up at your door. Same thing with the OpenAI and the GPT components. You can't design something that has anything to do with sensitive things like that. You can't leverage what you're building to spam, mislead, bully, harass, defame. I've had a lot of discussions recently with the election coming. Well, what's going to happen with AI and the fact that we can fake somebody's appearance, fake somebody's voice? You could create a GPT to spread propaganda. Well, that's what these privacy controls are trying to prevent. So look for a lot of these, I would say, fear-mongering of, oh, they're going to create something using OpenAI that's going to cause just a panic related to elections. I don't think a lot of that's going to happen because of the safeguards that are built in. Sure, you can trick a AI, not easily, but it can be done, and we'll talk about that, I think, in a future episode. But honestly, just know that there are some, I would say, safeguards out there, and be thinking about when you're getting one of these GPTs that they were designed with that in mind. So overarchingly, I would say, what are we looking at is we are not compromising the privacy of others. And one of the big things is, I just said we're prompting a GPT, we're giving it information. But as the developer of another GPT, you're not supposed to collect or process or disclose anything that can be construed as personal data. and you have to comply with legal requirements. So think about the CPRA in California, or CCPA is how it used to be called. That's a privacy law, and you have to comply with those kinds of things, even with a GPT. So European GDPR, there's lots of privacy concerns when it comes to this stuff. So another thing you can't do is you can't use biometric systems for identification or assessment, including facial recognition, which is interesting because that's pretty much how we're getting into our phones, our laptops, everything else. But the reason for this is they don't want to facilitate spyware, communication surveillance, or monitoring of individuals. So for a while, people were creating caricatures of their faces with some of these platforms that were available on the Google Store and even the Apple Store. So essentially, we were trying to create these cool portraits that look cartoony, or they would change our faces. Before these laws were in place, however, what was happening is the companies were collecting all of that telemetry about your face. And what they found is you could actually unlock a phone, or you could unlock a device with a face that had been scanned into this app. So that was something that was very concerning, and why OpenAI put that into their OpenAI platform privacy policy, which is you can't use that data that you've collected because of things like that. So I would say another piece of this is we talk often about money, and you can't leverage the platform to facilitate things like real money gambling, payday lending. They actually put a section in here that says you can't use it to engage in political campaigning or lobbying, including, this is the important part, generating campaign materials personalized to a target or specific demographic. So I think that was like the exciting thing for a lot of people is, look at all this data we're going to be able to pull out of a GPT. Can't do it. Not supposed to be able to do it. And that really brings me to the piece that I found most interesting. We are talking about artificial intelligence. You know how I think about it. It's actually augmented intelligence. It still needs to be prompted to do something. But the question is, how is OpenAI checking up on all of these GPTs that are being created? And their answer to this is they use a combination of automated systems, human review, and users reporting to find if there has been a potential violation of policies when they're assessing a GPT. So this is just a really good way of saying, should you find something on that store that violates the privacy policy, I would urge you to report it, because it's going to make it better. It's going to make the platform better. And I'm sure you're thinking what I was thinking, which is, well, can't they have their AI do that? Again, we're still in the prompt phase of these large language models. And machine learning, I think, is going to be really the next step on being able to do that kind of stuff, which is going to be looking at the code and seeing what is the intent, what is it written to do. We're getting closer to that. We're just not there yet. So our third topic today is, have I been pwned? And the fact that the site, has found a statistically significant data set, which is titled nas.api, and added it to their database, their data set. It's 104 gigabytes of data. And 1/3 of all of the emails and accounts in that data set are actually net new, meaning, this data came from something. And what they've traced it back to is what's called a stealer log. And that's something that sits out on compromised machines and collects credentials, whether it's key logged, whether it's scraping files, whether it's sitting inline. It's on these devices, and then it's feeding back to a central repository. So if you haven't ever looked at the website, if you haven't ever been to Have I Been Pwned, it's definitely interesting for a end user. Is it as useful in a cyber defender like me and my organization? Typically not. I'm typically getting that information from a threat intelligence platform that's plugged directly into the dark/deep web. It's crawling that information, looking for compromised users, compromised passwords, and just as much information as it can find. And then it brings that up, aggregates it, and identifies if there's a risk to the enterprise or organization. But that doesn't necessarily mean that extends the protection to you and your Gmail account or your Hotmail or your Outlook or whatever. So if you go out, take a look, and just if you put in your email address, it'll tell you what data breaches that particular account has been a part of. Some of them are old, from 2012, from 2018, from 2020, whatever. I would be shocked if you still have the same password from when those breaches actually happened. I would actually say shame on you if you do, and don't tell me because I don't want to know. But what I think it does is it helps to identify, has there been one more recently, since perhaps you have changed your password, or maybe you've been meaning to set up multi-factor authentication, but you haven't. And if there's one piece of advice I can give you, it is on your personal email, do yourself a favor. If that's the one account that you enable for multi-factor authentication, do it. Because if I'm an attacker and I'm going after someone, the first thing I'm going to try to do is get their email, username, and password. Why? Because then I can take that information and I can go to any other website and I can start resetting your accounts, credit cards, banking, whatever. So I would say definitely enable multi-factor authentication on that account. Also do it on banking. And if you can do it, don't do the SMS option. Don't do the text-based option. Do something that is on an authenticator. Google has an authenticator. Microsoft has an authenticator. They're free. And that just gives you an additional layer of protection on a very, it's a significant account for attackers. Everyone's trying to get it. Don't let them get it. And I would also say, because I'm always trying to give you some good advice, when I look at the statistics on Have I Been Pwned, there are 12 billion, almost 13 billion pwned accounts, and over 741 websites just today listed, which means they're compromised. What it doesn't say is, are they still compromised? All it's saying is that at one point in time, your username and your password or your social security number were part of a breach. It's on the dark web. Somebody has it. So making sure you change those passwords often is critical. But I would argue that we should be looking at doing something which is actually a lot easier to do now than it was before, which is get rid of your passwords completely. Most applications and most websites will now allow you to do something called passkeys. And really, we're aiming to make all of your accounts more secure by using passkeys because it enables passwordless login. It replaces the traditional password. You don't have a password anymore. And the thing that I want you to take from this is that each passkey is a unique digital key that cannot be reused. And that's generally where we run into trouble, is when you reuse passwords. And we all do it. Even when you have a password manager, you're sitting on your phone, you're signing up for something, and you're like, I have to go in and do that on my laptop because it's not as easy to do on my phone. So you use that same password where you're like, this account doesn't matter that much. You don't need to do that. You can leverage a passkey that then stores an encrypted format of that passkey on your device instead of a company's server. And really, what does that mean? Well, it's keeping it safe in the event of some kind of data breach. So even if that company gets breached, they only have half of what they would need in order to get your data. So I would recommend, if you want to get comfortable with this concept, grab a password manager. There's a couple of different ones that are available for consumers, and try a passkey with one of your own accounts. Just pick one and look at how easy it is to A, set up, B, use, and C, keep you safe. So thanks again for spending some time with me and E360 Security. Have a good one.